Welcome everyone. Today is really the time to start pulling up your carrot tops. It is going to be an amazing event. We're here for the celebration of David's book, RetroSuburbia. And the interest in this book has gone through the roof. You know, I'm really glad that we're outdoors today for that reason, because we would have blown the top of it. And I'm very excited for David and Sue and everyone involved. My name's Peter O'Mara, and I'm a good friend of David and Sue's. Now, I'm also the events coordinator, but today I'm in the capacity as a friend. And it's been a friendship that I value very much, and may that continue. Now, I'm a little bit sick today, but it brings a very nice timbre to my voice. Myself, I'm a boy of the Melbourne suburbs, now a man of Hepburn Springs, or perhaps man boy, or boy man. And I've been part of this team at Melliodora, watching a beautiful thing unfold under the gentle, generous guidance of both Dave and Sue that has brought to fruition this great day. Now, before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people. We would like to acknowledge them, the Wurundjeri people, who are traditional custodians of this land on which today we meet. We would like also to pay our respects to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present. Now, I'll just give you a bit of a rundown of what's going to happen today. I'll be off here pretty quickly, and we'll have a tune from the very formidable vegetable sound system. And then David will give us a bit of a talk. And then we'll have Costa up here to launch the book, which will be wonderful, I would imagine. Actually, going back to Costa and David, it's been very interesting being on the end of a couple of their emails. There's this sort of bilateral sort of man crush thing happening, you know, and I can really imagine that happening again today. Just watch out for it, beware. It's a real thing, and good luck to you both. It's been lovely to watch from the sidelines. After that, David will give a bit of a response and a thank you. We'll hear from Robin from Pip Magazine, who has given us the kind offer that anyone who purchases a book at this launch gets a free copy of the magazine, but she'll tell you about that. And it's a wonderful gesture, and thank you, Robin. Yeah, pip it up, pip it up, pip it up. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to the very formidable vegetable sound system.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks so much for coming down. What an awesome turnout. It's been well worth the trip from WA. I think these guys are the only ones that could pull me away from the house truck construction of veggie oil fun. But introducing to my right, Mal Webb and Kylie Morrigan and Alex Burkoy of the formidable vegetable sound system. I think given the current climate, we're going to start with a little bit of climate change dubstep for you guys. You up for it? This is from our first album based on David's first book, Permaculture, a Rhymer's Manual. That's the album, not the book. Here we go. There's actually a pretty fun video of David rapping to this song online, so you can check that out in your spare time. Well, one thing's for certain, and that's that nothing's for certain, 'cause you never know what's around the bend. In whatever you're dealing, just accept what you're feeling, 'cause there's no point in believing it will never end. 'Cause it's changing, constantly changing, in any situation. Well, the only thing that remains the same is change. Like a change in the season, change is there for a reason. Can't stop ourselves from moving around the sun. And there's no point in complaining if it's stormy and raining. Just gotta get an umbrella, go play in the rain with someone. 'Cause it's changing, every moment changing. Sometimes there's not much you can do, and other times there is. But no matter who you are, you've just got to be cool with change. Change is there, make the most of it. You might as well use it for your benefit. Like if your food goes bad, compost it. And when there's no more planes, build a pirate ship and sail the seas. You can do as you please. Oh, but only if you know you've got to improvise your way through change. That's right. Now I'll tell you, even if you keep very still, be guaranteed that nothing else will. And if you just sit around wondering what to do, and you don't make change, it will happen to you. Yes. I tell you, we got small change and big change and a bit of loose change, slow change and fast change and a wind change. We got sea change and tree change and climate change, you change and me change and a key change. Alex Burgoyne. Oh yeah. You guys ready for a bit of permaculture hip-hop? Alright. Well, change is all the rage, right? Turn the page away from these strange, out of phase deranged crazy days. Cause it's about time we engage, start rearranging our brains out of these old ways, behaving like we're insane. Yeah, we gotta step out of our cages, worrying about our wages or the crashing stock exchanges. It's time to turn the pages. Don't be ashamed, don't wear the blame, just drain the main vein of the pain, take to the stages and become agents of change. Yeah, thank you very much. We're Formidable Vegetable Sound System. We'll be back. We've got some CDs over in the bookshop if you want to check out our music. But back to Peter Amara and David Holmgren.
Well, well, if that doesn't put funk into your zucchinis, what will? Just watching that on.
Something pulled out.
How's that? Not out?
No.
Up. What? Keep going.
Hello, I'm still going. Up.
Right into the mic, into the mic.
Okay.
There you go. Can you hear me right? Oh my God.
Not really.
How about that one?
How's that? That's me. I'm back.
Sorry.
Musicians, hey? You know, what is it with them? You know, I was actually watching the bass player there, and there's something with this head thing, you know? It never quite worked out.
Don't have a bass player.
Yeah, no eucalyptus leaves, no bass player. They got something going though, I can tell you that. Okay, we're just about to hear from David, and a very funny thing happened to me very early in my relationship with David. I was chairing a meeting and David was there, and someone disparately said that David Holmgren, and I thought it was one of the great compliments. And with that moment, I want to introduce the author of RetroSuburbia, David Holmgren.
And yeah, I hope you liked my retro lectern. I made it yesterday to go on our 1955 trolley from Sue's family home, painted lime green. We don't have the Victor lawnmower anymore that used to also be lime green. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. It's amazing to be here because 16 years ago, my book, Permaculture, Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability, was launched at the Sustainable Living Festival. I didn't manage to check out how close it is to exactly 16 years, but it must have been about this time of the year. And after a rather serious speech I gave in the Edge Amphitheatre just up there, I think it was the first gig in the not quite finished amphitheatre, Melbourne comedian Rod Quantock led the crowd to the riverbank to launch the book. Mounted as a sail on a zucchini boat, complete with Polynesian outrigger. As it bobbed around the waves of the riverboats, Rod instructed it to sail forth and conquer the world. Now, I don't know where it ended up, but the ideas have certainly gone around the world with many print runs and translations into 9 languages, despite actually not a single review in mainstream media in Australia. So you could attribute that to the internet, the global permaculture movement, and maybe a few 6-month-long teaching and study tours that I did before I stopped flying. But one of the main vehicles for taking the ideas in principles around the world has actually been zucchinis. Well, maybe vegetables in general, through the creativity, fun and hard work of Charlie McGee and Formidable Vegetable Sound System. So I have a big thank you to Charlie and the incredible musicians he plays with. So after years of promises, we are finally back at SLF to launch RetroSuburbia. And there are many connections, echoes, and contrasts. Principles was self-published, not because we couldn't get a publisher, but maybe because I'm too much of a do-it-yourself and a control freak that want to sort of manage the show. RetroSuburbia is also self-published, but the scale of this project meant that at times others were making the decisions. It was quite interesting being with my editor, Beck Lowe, sometimes asking, and what do I do next? And Beck would tell me as she moved from editor into a project management role. And Principles was abstract theory in black and white with few illustrations, and for many, a dense read. RetroSuburbia is practical, in full colour, and hopefully a romp to read, while still challenging conventions on multiple fronts. It'll be interesting to see some of the reactions to the things I've said. Principles was global in scope and application. RetroSuburbia is unashamedly local in every respect. So back in 2002, the idea of our cities and suburbs becoming abundant food-producing spaces was sort of the crazed idea of Permies and community gardeners. And sharing your house or car seemed like unsound advice. And weeds and fungi were still seen as mostly undesirable rather than edible. In academia, the ideas that naturalised species might be doing nature's work rather than undoing it was heresy, and the evidence that Indigenous people had once farmed this continent was not being considered. I think today, out in rural Australia, radical innovators are showing the way forward with a diverse range of regenerative agricultural systems and techniques. At the same time that ag science is increasingly being recognised as largely corrupted by agribusiness corporations desperate to sell their defective products. And also a lot of other dark side things. The echoes of 9/11 are still continuing to ring, with the surveillance state finding their job a breeze with the assistance of Facebook and Google. Climate change is in our face and accelerating. The peak of conventional oil that created fossil fuel consumerism is already in the rear-view mirror. And the global economy is basically on life support for the last decade due to the tune of multiple trillions of dollars from the central banks of funny money. And over the horizon from the still lucky country, proxy wars, trade wars, migrant tsunamis, internment camps, and other threats to the so-called, what do they call it? The rules-based global order are continuing to grow. You could say closer to home, unprecedented personal and household debt, the obesity crisis, digital narcissism, and intense debates about identity politics are promising that we might disappear up our own behinds. So there's good signs and bad signs, I suppose, over that time. And over most of that time, I've been presenting my Aussie Street story as a way of celebrating the good and recognising the not so good aspects of our recent residential history and the potential for Australians to survive and thrive through the coming challenges. So drawing on the experience of pioneering Permies and other do-it-yourself and do-it-ourself self-reliance generalists, we are now gleaning those fruits of the experiments, the trials, the demonstration sites that are being replicated and fine-tuned through permaculture courses, groups, related activism through transition towns, as well as a whole lot of more mainstream government-funded sustainability streets, Living Smart and similar programs. And it's interesting how a lot of these programs that started off through the lens of what sustainability professionals were taught, that it's about transport and it's about energy efficiency and photovoltaic panels, and then finding that actually a lot of people were interested in growing food and composting. That wasn't sort of what they'd been taught in university that was really the central to the sustainability agenda. But they'd also been taught by the sociologists and the psychologists that you've got to work with where people are at. Start with, oh, well, okay, if people want to grow food and whatever, let's do that. And then gradually the evidence started to filter through that actually those things that food and agriculture and making our landscapes agriculturally productive, hey, that is actually the essence of what we need to do. That's not to disparage all those other things that are part of the built field in RetroSuburbia, how we retrofit the buildings, water systems, what are the energy options, even if my take on that includes a few things that are still not seen as that acceptable, like wood energy, for example. Because a lot of the focus of sustainability is now shifting to resilience. How do we actually adapt to the changes that are coming? And of course, permaculture has always been focused on that. But when it was suggested to me that I should include the word resilience in the title of a book which is so locally focused, I thought, I wonder if resilience, by the time the book comes out, is going to be a word that has been so wrung out and all the juices taken out of it that we need to throw it away. The same as Principles and Pathways was called Beyond Sustainability, because I saw that was already happened with sustainability at the turn of the millennium. But nevertheless, I did do that. And maybe it's also partly about this book is really aiming to get out beyond the converted, and it definitely is a book for the punters. It's not the book that I thought of writing about the theory, the policy reasons why governments should support the reboot of the household and community non-monetary economies, where people do stuff for themselves again. There's a huge framework of why that makes sense. But we're basically ignoring that because that system is never going to accept that until it's desperate on its last legs, because that would involve a contraction of the monetary economy. RetroSuburbia is economic treason. Treason to that economy. Not to our economy and the economy of all of our forebears, where everyone did a part of what they needed themselves or got it from someone through the gift economy, the barter, and of course just within the household through the process of reciprocity and love that binds a family or even a household of people who share. So RetroSuburbia is a book, it's a website, it's a strategy and a network to change the world one household at a time, and starting in Melbourne and regional Victoria. So I don't want to say that exclusively, and the book includes case studies from Western Australia, our fantastic friends over there, Shani Graham and Tim Darby, who run EcoBurbia in Fremantle. And the website has other case studies that are in Hobart and in New Zealand, and even that city in the north, Sydney, and Adelaide. But it's just that I've written a book from my own experience that centres in this part of the world. And I also have a sense that there's a critical mass underneath the radar in Melbourne, in Ballarat, in Bendigo, in the small country towns, doing something like RetroSuburbia that can come out of the woodwork, and that we may have a critical mass to bring about, not mass change, don't worry about the mass change. If we can get it from the 0.1% to the 1 and 2% and to the 5 and 10%, that's all we need to do. It was interesting that Shani Graham, talking about her experience with the Hulbert Street project in Fremantle, she said, you know, when about 20% of the people in the street were engaged in what was happening, the 80% thought they themselves were already the minority. The literature suggests that about 30% of sort of a cohort, a neighbourhood, some sort of network, actually making some significant positive, proactive change leads to the rest going, oh, this is what's happening. Sue talks about it at another level. She talks about with children, you only need another couple of households to share childcare with and do things in a similar way to create a new normal. Kids are incredibly flexible, adaptable. Oh yeah, this is what we do here. But no, yeah, it's different to over there. So at that larger scale, we want to create a new normal while completely ignoring the obsession with how do we get this 50% mark, that magic mark where so-called majority politics suddenly ticks in and the mainstream forces take notice. But actually, when you're talking about radical change that the system doesn't want to do, what percentage of the population do you actually need on board? I seem to remember with the Gulf War II, we had a vast majority, 70 or 80% of the population against going, but we still went. So forget about that whole process of how do you get the majority to do stuff. It's not navel gazing to say, we're going to just do it ourselves because it's better for us here now. So taking that further in terms of the popular culture, retro in RetroSuburbia means retrofitting to make fit for purpose. And rather than believing that we have the time, the resources, the wisdom to start from scratch on fresh ground, as a society, we really need to fix the mess we've inherited and turn the problem into the solution. But retro also is unashamedly retro style that celebrates creative, repurposed stuff and honours what we've inherited from our forebears as the new cool. Of course, that gets laughed at by the elite commentators as airhead hipster fashion. It's interesting, I've seen all this happen before, the way hippie values were taken by the marketers and resold back to them as fashion, and then the commentators said, see, it's just all superficial, of no substance. And it's all happening again with hipster fashion. So there is something underneath that, and I think it is time now, the opportunity is right for a big change, and that will roll out around the world. It's hard to stop it. There's inquiries from the New York Times about interviews, and people want to translate the book into Spanish in Latin America. Wait a minute, we've just got to get our act together here first. Thank you.
Thank you, David. David Holmgren restyled. I don't know if anyone saw him in the white suit, but maybe this is the start of something, David. I've just decided to change the schedule around a little. I think we need some music. I think we need to funk it up, you know. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, the formidable vegetable sound system.
Yeah, we're all about getting funky. In fact, the beginnings of Formidable Vegetable was inspired by David's first book, Permaculture Principles and Pathways, and I did possibly the nerdiest thing a musician could ever do, and turned what's ultimately a textbook into an album. So that's what our first album is based on, the 12 principles of permaculture that David devised, well, probably over 10 years ago now. And so yeah, it's pretty exciting to see permaculture being taken to the next level. And we've got to keep it fun, folks. We've got to make it awesome and irresistible for anyone to, you know, even think about not growing food in their backyard. So, and front yard. Front yard's the best advertisement we got. How are we going for those beats?
Oh, you haven't got it?
We've got Mal Webb on sound. He's a sound guy. So this is the first song that was ever inspired by one of David's principles. It's based on the produce no waste principle. And it's a true story that growing up in the southwest of Western Australia, which is where I'm from. It's called No Such Thing as Waste. When I was a little boy, I liked to catch the rain, while people all around my town watched it flow right down the drain. But because our little shed in the bush wasn't on the mains, the only water we had to use was in a tank caught from the rain. But there's no such thing as waste, only stuff in the wrong place. That's right, there's no such thing as waste. Misusing water's a disgrace. Then I moved to the city, rented a house on my way to buy a bed. But I saw one lying on the side of the road, so I took that one instead.
I'll have that.
And I also found a fridge, a couch, and a big old sewing machine in the biggest pile of thrown out stuff that I had ever seen. But there's no such thing as waste, oh no, only stuff in the wrong place. Yeah. That's right, there's no such thing as waste. Well, that old landfill's gotta be replaced. Replace it now with... Let's hear it from Mal Webb on the trombone. Then, down the track, I found out that diesel cars can run on veggie fat. So I bought a truck and hit the road, smelling like fish and chips. I rescued piles of wasted oil from the back of restaurants, and said I'd be a fool if I bought my fuel when there's oil nobody wants. Why? 'Cause there's no such thing as waste. Oh no, only stuff in the wrong place. Yeah, I said there's no such thing as waste. That old idea's gotta be replaced. Hey, 'cause what we're gonna do, guys? Well, we gotta reduce, reuse, repair, and recycle. Yeah, reduce, reuse, repair, and recycle. Now I get my things out of rubbish bins and I compost every crumb. I save my seeds and eat my weeds and feed the leftovers to your mum.
Thanks, Charlie.
Gonna build a house from the rubbish tip, gonna keep this planet clean. Reuse ideas that have been around for years to live within its means. 'Cause there's no such thing as waste. Oh no, only stuff in the wrong place. No, there's no such thing as waste. Yeah.